The pulsating lights of Galactic City reflected off the sleek metal buildings as Connor stepped out of his shuttle. The spaceport was buzzing with activity from hundreds of alien species, all going about their daily routines. But today, Connor had more pressing matters on his mind. He had just moved into a new apartment complex on the outer edge of the city, hoping to settle into a quiet life after years of serving in the galactic forces. As he approached his apartment in the towering residential block, Connor noticed something peculiar. His next-door neighbor, an alien with shimmering green skin and vibrant violet eyes, was standing outside, involved in what looked like some kind of ritual. She was chanting softly in an unfamiliar language while her forearms moved in synchronized motions, guiding floating crystals around her in a complex dance. Connor paused, not wanting to interrupt but completely fascinated by the strange display. "Hi there," Connor greeted, waving with a casual smile. The alien woman abruptly stopped her ritual, the crystals clattering to the ground. Her eyes darted to Connor, and for a brief moment, they glowed a brilliant purple. "Oh, apologies, I did not realize anyone was watching." Her voice was melodic, almost musical. "I am Zeri of the Altry, your new neighbor." "Connor," he replied, scratching the back of his head. "Sorry if I interrupted something important." That looked intense. Zeri chuckled softly, her violet eyes twinkling with amusement. "Nothing too serious, just a cultural practice. You humans would call it meditation. A calming ritual to center myself after the long journey here." Connor couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her ritual than simple meditation, but he let it slide. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. If you need anything, feel free to knock on my door." Zeri tilted her head, her gaze lingering on him a little longer than what felt normal. "Thank you, Connor. I shall." With that, she turned and floated into her apartment, the door closing with a soft hiss behind her. Connor stood there for a moment, shaking off the strange vibe before heading inside. Little did he know, his new neighbor would soon turn his quiet life upside down in ways he could never have imagined. The unusual sounds. A few nights passed, and Connor had all but forgotten about the strange encounter with Zeri. He was adjusting to life in Galactic City, enjoying the blend of alien cultures, new foods, and tech that Earth could only dream of. But then, things started to get weird. It was late one night when Connor first heard it. A soft humming, almost like a distant melody, began vibrating through the walls. At first, he thought it was the building's system acting up, but as he focused on the sound, he realized it was coming from Zeri's apartment. Curious, he pressed his ear against the wall. The humming grew louder, accompanied by faint clicking sounds and rhythmic thuds. Connor pulled away, confused. Was this part of another one of her rituals? The sound continued for hours, and Connor found himself tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep. The next morning, exhausted and annoyed, he decided to confront Zeri. But when he knocked on her door, there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but still no response. Frustrated, he went back to his apartment, determined to ignore it. However, the strange sounds didn't stop. They seemed to grow louder each night, and the rhythm of the thuds began to follow a distinct pattern, almost like mating calls. Connor's heart skipped a beat at the realization. Was this some kind of alien mating ritual? He had heard stories from fellow soldiers about strange customs among different species, but never in his wildest dreams did he think he'd be living next to one. Embarrassed and unsure of how to handle the situation, Connor decided to give it a few more days before doing anything. "Enough to know that you're not like them," she replied, stepping closer again. "You're special." Josh's mind raced. He didn't like where this was going. His cover was airtight, but the way Leanie was acting, it felt like she knew more than she was letting on. And if she did, that could mean trouble, big trouble. But before he could respond, his enhanced hearing caught something strange, something beyond the sound of her voice. A low humming sound was coming from Leanie's direction, not from her lips, but from her body itself. It was faint but unmistakable, and it seemed to vibrate at a frequency that his nanotech couldn't entirely process. It was the same hum he'd heard that first night he helped her move the mirror, the same sound that had triggered his systems into overdrive. Josh straightened up. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" he asked, his voice firm now, dropping the casual tone. Leanie's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more intense, her eyes darkening as she took another step closer. "Perhaps you're right," she whispered, her voice almost predatory now. "There's a lot you don't know, Josh Gilligan, but you will." Before he could react, the humming grew louder, and Josh's nanotech systems surged with activity. His vision blurred momentarily, and for the first time in years, he felt off balance. The world around him seemed to shift, and Leanie's form seemed to shimmer, flickering between solid and something more ethereal. Instinctively, he reached for the combat knife he always kept concealed under his shirt, but before he could draw it, Leanie was suddenly right in front of him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. The contact sent a shockwave through his body, his enhancements going haywire. His muscles tensed, every fiber of his being reacting to the strange energy pulsing from her touch. "You're not the only one with secrets," she whispered, her voice vibrating in tune with the humming now. "And you're not the only one enhanced." Josh's mind raced. This was more than just some alien neighbor with a mysterious past. Leanie was something else entirely, something powerful. His enhanced systems tried to compensate, analyzing the signals, but they were overwhelmed by the strange energy radiating from her. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Josh broke free from her touch, stumbling backward. His body felt sluggish, his reflexes dulled. Whatever she was doing to him, it was working. He could feel his control slipping. "You, what are you?" he demanded, breathing heavily, trying to regain his composure. Leanie didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched him with a strange, almost sad expression. "You're not ready to know, Josh," she said softly, her glow dimming slightly. "Not yet." Before he could respond, she turned and walked toward the door, her movements graceful and fluid. "But soon," she added, looking back at him with those nebula-like eyes, "soon you will be." With that, she was gone, leaving Josh standing in his own kitchen, disoriented and shaken. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Who, or what, was Leanie? And what did she want from him? As the door slid shut, Josh's nanotech finally began to stabilize, but the questions in his mind multiplied. One thing was clear: life on New Aurora had just taken a turn for the dangerous, and whatever Leanie's plans were, he wasn't prepared for them. Unraveling the mystery, Josh spent the next few days keeping a low profile, his mind constantly turning over the strange encounter with Leanie. She had shown him something he wasn't ready to face. The intensity of her presence, the way her body hummed with energy, and how his nanotech systems had struggled to keep up. It all pointed to something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding between neighbors. As a covert operative, he was trained to assess threats and act decisively, but this situation was far beyond anything he'd been prepared for. Leanie wasn't just a curious alien with odd habits. She was something much more dangerous, and if her abilities were anything like what he'd felt that night, he needed to be ready for anything. Josh's military instincts kicked in. First, he'd need intel, something to explain who or what Leanie was. His enhanced senses had captured a lot during their last interaction, but most of it was confusing data his nanotech couldn't fully interpret. He needed to dig deeper. He began his research by scanning through the databases he had access to as part of his covert operations. New Aurora, being an alien colony, had records on its inhabitants, but nothing stood out when it came to Leanie. No red flags, no anomalies, just the standard profile of a recent immigrant from a nearby star system. There were no indicators of her possessing any dangerous capabilities or being part of any hidden organization, yet his gut told him otherwise. After coming up empty with official records, Josh decided it was time to go underground. He tapped into the black market networks that operated quietly beneath the surface of New Aurora. These channels were full of smugglers, spies, and information brokers. People who often knew more than any government database ever would. If there was something off about Leany, someone in the network might know. Using his old contacts, Josh arranged a meeting with an information broker known only as Galactic, a shady figure who specialized in obscure alien technology and bioengineering secrets. The meeting took place in a dimly lit corner of a bar on the outskirts of the city, far from the shiny, tourist-friendly areas. Galactic, a wiry creature with insect-like features, shifted nervously in his seat as Josh sat down across from him. "You're not easy to find these days, Killian," Galactic buzzed in his strange, raspy voice. "What brings you to my part of the world?" Josh leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I need information on someone. A local. An alien named Leany. She's different." Galactic's eyes flickered with interest. "Different how?" "She has abilities. Powers, I think. There was something about her energy, her presence. It knocked out my nanotech for a minute. I've never seen anything like it." Galactic leaned back, tapping his thin, claw-like fingers on the table. "Leany, huh? Blue skin, glowing eyes. Recently moved in around here?" he asked, a sly grin forming on his face. Josh nodded, his eyes narrowing. "You know her?" "I know of her," Galactic replied, lowering his voice. "She's from a race called the Ildari. They're not common in this part of the galaxy, and for good reason. They're special. Not exactly the friendliest species, though they keep to themselves most of the time. The thing is, the Ildari aren't just any aliens. They have, well, let's call them biological enhancements." Josh's mind raced. "What kind of enhancements?" Galactic leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "They can manipulate energy on a level that most tech can't even detect. Bioelectrics, psionics, and some forms of biochemical warfare. It's all part of their evolution. Some rumors even say they can influence the minds of weaker beings, though that's mostly myth." Josh recalled the strange pull he had felt in Leany's presence, the way his thoughts had seemed to blur, and how his enhanced senses struggled to keep up with her energy. It made sense now. She wasn't just an alien with some quirky habits. She was part of a species that had powers most people would find unimaginable. "Why would she be here, on New Aurora?" Josh asked, trying to piece it all together. Galactic shrugged. "Who knows? The Ildari aren't the types to settle down in quiet little colonies. They're usually involved in bigger things, war, espionage, or covert operations. But if she's here, there's probably a reason." Josh felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Do you think she's a threat?" Galactic chuckled darkly. "A threat? Every Ildari is a threat, my friend. The question you should be asking is, who is she here for?" That question lingered in Josh's mind long after the meeting. He returned to his apartment, going over the information again and again. Leany wasn't just some random neighbor. She was likely involved in something far more dangerous. But why him? Was she targeting him specifically? Or was he just a pawn in a larger game? That night, Josh couldn't sleep. He stayed up, monitoring the perimeter of his building, setting up additional defenses, and triple-checking his systems. His nanotech had recovered, but he wasn't taking any chances. If Leany was as powerful as Galactic suggested, he couldn't let his guard down for a second. The next morning, Leany didn't appear at his door like she usually did. For the first time in weeks, there was no knock, no unexpected visit. The silence was eerie, and Josh felt the tension in the air building with every passing hour. Something was coming, and he had a feeling it wouldn't be good. As the sun set over New Aurora's metallic skyline, Josh received a message on his secured comm. It was encrypted, the kind of code only used for high-priority communications. He decoded it quickly, his heart pounding. "Meet me at the coordinates. Bring your weapon. You're going to need it. The message wasn't signed, but he didn't need to guess who it was from. Leanie was ready to reveal her secrets, and Josh wasn't sure if he was ready for what was about to come next. The showdown. Josh stood at the edge of the city, staring out at the location Leanie had sent him. The coordinates led him to an abandoned industrial zone on the outskirts of New Aurora, a perfect spot for something covered and potentially dangerous. He tightened his grip on the pulse rifle slung across his back, his other hand instinctively checking his nanotech systems. Everything seemed stable, but after his last encounter with Leanie, he wasn't about to take any chances. The air was thick with tension as he approached the old warehouse. Rusted metal, cracked pavement, and long-abandoned machinery created an eerie atmosphere. His enhanced senses scanned the surroundings, but he picked up nothing. No movement, no signals. It was too quiet. As Josh entered the warehouse, the door creaked behind him, echoing through the vast, empty space. Inside, the air was cooler, and the dim lighting cast long shadows across the floor. He moved cautiously, every step measured, eyes scanning for any sign of Leanie. Then, out of the darkness, she appeared. Leanie stood in the center of the room, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Her expression was calm but unreadable. She wore a simple robe, but the energy radiating from her was unmistakable. Josh could feel a hum of power in the air, like the charge before a storm. "You came," Leanie said, her voice soft but carrying weight. Josh nodded, his body tense. "You asked me to." "What's this about, Leanie? Why the secrecy? Why the games?" She sighed, taking a step closer to him. "I wasn't sure you were ready to understand, but now, I think you need to know the truth." Josh's pulse quickened. Truth about what? Leanie's eyes glowed brighter, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "About why I'm here, Josh. About who I really am." He tightened his grip on the pulse rifle, not out of fear, but out of instinct. "I already know some of it," he said, his voice steady. "You're Ildari. Your people have abilities, powers. But I need to know why you're here, in this colony, right next to me. Are you targeting me?" Leanie shook her head slowly. "No, Josh, I'm not your enemy. I'm here because I was sent to protect you." Josh blinked, taken aback. "Protect me? From what?" Leanie raised her hand, and in an instant, the air around them shimmered with energy. Her body seemed to pulse with raw power, and for a moment, Josh's nanotech systems flickered, struggling to compensate. But this time, he held firm, bracing himself against the strange sensation. "I'm part of a group," she explained, her voice filled with a mixture of resolve and sadness. "We're tasked with ensuring that certain events in the galaxy don't spiral out of control. The Ildari have always been involved in the shadows, preventing disasters before they happen. And right now, Josh, you're at the center of one of those potential disasters." Josh's mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. "Why me? I'm just a covered operative on a simple assignment. What could I possibly have to do with some galactic catastrophe?" Leanie's eyes softened. "You're not just a covered operative, Josh. You've been selected, chosen, in fact, for something much bigger than you realize. The nanotech enhancements you carry are part of a highly classified project, aren't they?" Josh hesitated but nodded. His enhancements weren't standard issue, and they weren't something he talked about openly. But Leanie clearly knew more than she was letting on. She continued, "Those enhancements were designed by a coalition of human and alien scientists, but there's more to them than you were told. The tech inside you, it's evolving, adapting in ways even your superiors don't fully understand. In the wrong hands, or under the wrong influence, you could become a weapon powerful enough to destabilize entire systems." Josh's heart pounded in his chest. "A weapon? But I've never." Leanie interrupted gently. "Not yet. But soon. The signals your tech has been sending out, the way it's interfacing with your environment, it's drawing attention. Dangerous attention. Other factions have started to notice, and they'll stop at nothing to take you. My mission was to stay close, make sure you didn't fall into the wrong hands. But now things are escalating faster than we anticipated. Josh felt a chill run down his spine. His whole life had been built on control, on discipline, and now he was being told that he was part of some hidden galactic conflict he had never even known existed. "Why didn't you just tell me this from the start?" he demanded, frustration creeping into his voice. Leanie looked at him with an almost apologetic expression. "I couldn't risk it. The fewer people who knew, the better. But now, they're coming for you, Josh. I couldn't keep you in the dark any longer." Josh's mind raced as he pieced it together. "Who's coming for me?" Leanie's glowing eyes flared with intensity. "A rival group. They'd been watching you for weeks, and they're close. I can't protect you alone anymore. We need to leave this place. Now." Just as the words left her mouth, Josh's enhanced senses picked up something, a faint pulse of energy outside the building. His training kicked in immediately, and he spun around, scanning the perimeter. "They're here," Leanie said, her voice filled with urgency. Josh activated his nanotech systems, feeling the familiar surge of power as his body adjusted to combat mode. His pulse rifle was already in his hands, and his mind was clear, focused. He could hear the faint hum of approaching vehicles, the whisper of footsteps in the distance. Leanie stepped forward, her body glowing with energy. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. You need to get to the extraction point I've arranged." Josh shook his head. "No way. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Whatever happens, we're in this together." Leanie looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You don't understand how dangerous they are." Josh smirked, gripping his rifle tighter. "I've faced danger before. Let's see what they've got." Leanie smiled, her glow intensifying. "Very well. Stay close to me. This is going to get messy." As the sound of the approaching enemy grew louder, Josh and Leanie stood side by side, ready for whatever was about to come through those doors. The real battle was just beginning. Unleashing the storm. The first blast hit the warehouse door with a thunderous crash, sending shards of metal flying in all directions. Josh ducked instinctively, rolling to cover behind an old, rusted pillar. Leanie stood her ground in the center of the room, her glowing form radiating energy that bent the air around her. The enemy had arrived, and they weren't holding back. Pulse rifles fired in rapid bursts from outside, the beams slicing through the air and ricocheting off the walls. Josh's reflexes kicked into overdrive, his nanotech systems enhancing his movements as he returned fire. He could feel the pulse of the weapon in his hands, each shot precise and deadly. But the enemy wasn't ordinary. These were professionals, highly trained operatives from the rival group Leanie had warned him about. Leanie, however, was in a league of her own. With a graceful sweep of her hand, a wave of energy shot out from her body, catching several of the attackers in its wake. They were lifted off the ground, suspended for a moment before being thrown back like rag dolls. The raw power she wielded was awe-inspiring. And for the first time, Josh understood just how dangerous the Eldari truly were. But the enemy kept coming. "They're using dampeners." Leanie shouted over the noise, her voice strained. "They're trying to suppress my energy fields." Josh cursed under his breath as he scanned the room, spotting small, disc-shaped devices embedded in the walls. The dampeners were designed to interfere with energy-based powers. Clearly, the enemy had come prepared. "I'll take them out," Josh yelled, switching tactics. He sprinted along the edge of the room, dodging incoming fire as his enhanced reflexes allowed him to move faster than a normal human. One by one, he shot the dampeners, his aim dead on. Sparks flew as the devices exploded, and with each one destroyed, Leanie's power surged back. "That's it," Leanie called, her voice now filled with confidence. "They won't be able to stop me now." With a fierce determination, Leanie unleashed her full potential. Her body blazed with light, and the temperature in the room skyrocketed. The air crackled with electricity, and Josh could feel the energy vibrating through his bones. It was like standing at the heart of a storm. The attackers hesitated for a moment, just long enough for Leanie to strike. She raised both hands, and a shockwave of energy burst outward, sending the remaining enemies flying backward. The walls trembled, the ground shook, and in an instant, the warehouse was cleared of all hostile forces. Josh stood up, his rifle still in hand, surveying the scene. The enemy had been neutralized, their forces scattered or incapacitated. But he knew this wasn't over. This was just the first wave. Leanie's glow began to fade as she turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but Josh could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Even for someone as powerful as her, that level of energy output took its toll. "More are coming," she said, her voice quieter now. "We need to move, Josh. They won't stop until they have you." Josh nodded, still catching his breath. "Where's this extraction point you mentioned?" Leanie gestured to a hidden entrance at the back of the warehouse. "There's a transport waiting just outside the city. It'll take us to a safe location where we can regroup and figure out our next move." Josh frowned, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "And then what? We can't keep running forever." Leanie's eyes met his, and for a moment there was a flicker of uncertainty. "No, we can't. But we need time to find out who's behind this, who's pulling the strings. If we don't, you'll never be safe, and neither will anyone else." Josh took a deep breath, processing her words. His entire life had been built on structure, on following orders, on knowing exactly what the mission was. But now, he was thrust into a situation where everything felt uncertain. And yet, despite the chaos, there was something grounding about having Leanie by his side. "All right," he said, slinging the pulse rifle over his shoulder. "Let's get out of here." Together, they made their way through the hidden exit, moving quickly through the shadows of the industrial zone. The night air was cool against Josh's skin, a sharp contrast to the intense heat from the battle inside. He could hear the distant hum of vehicles, but they managed to stay out of sight. As they approached the transport, a sleek black vehicle with cloaking capabilities, Josh couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever was after him wasn't going to give up easily, and now that Leanie had revealed the truth about his nanotech, he understood why. Leanie climbed into the transport first, taking the pilot's seat, while Josh strapped himself in beside her. The vehicle hummed to life, its engines purring quietly as they lifted off the ground and ascended into the night sky. Below, the lights of New Aurora shimmered like stars, a reminder of the world they were leaving behind, at least for now. As they flew away from the city, Josh glanced at Leanie. She was focused on the controls, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes that told him she was thinking ahead, planning, strategizing. "What happens if we don't stop them?" Josh asked, breaking the silence. Leanie didn't look at him, but her grip on the controls tightened. "If we don't stop them, they'll use you. Your nanotech is a key to something much bigger than either of us. In the wrong hands, it could trigger a war that would engulf entire star systems. Billions of lives are at stake." Josh's stomach sank. The gravity of the situation hit him like a freight train. "No pressure, huh?" Leanie allowed herself a small smile. "We'll figure it out. Together." Josh leaned back in his seat, the weight of the world, no, the galaxy, on his shoulders. But as the transport sped through the stars, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, he wasn't going to face it alone. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.